Why, hello there. It's been a while. Actually, it's been about a week. So now we have it. The fifth Indiana Jones movie. Obviously, let me give my thought. I have the videos on my account if you want to get my honest, if you want to get my full reaction to those movies, but let's just, get my thoughts to the other movies. The first three masterpieces, they're great movies in their own right. All have their flaws, all have their strong points, but the first three, fantastic movies through and through. The fourth movie, it's a guilty pleasure, something that I get a lot of people will either hate or really just have a soft spot for it. I happen to have a soft spot for it. And now we have, honestly, just like the Avatar movie, I never thought this movie was going to get made. But now we have a fifth movie, surprisingly not directed by Steven Spielberg. And I'm very mixed about it. Because on one hand, I do think it's better than the fourth movie, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But on the other hand, I'm also disappointed with some of the aspects they went with this film. I'm going to try and go brief into this, but if I go on a rant, I apologize, but that's just what you have to expect at this point in this channel. So, let me just start with the positives. Obviously, Harrison Ford, 80 years old, still doing Indiana Jones. Huge props to him, and he still does a decent job in this movie. Mads Mikkelsen, great to see him as a villain this time around again. Nazi villain, I'm kind of glad they brought back the Nazis. Obviously kind of weird since, it's set in the late 60s, but it's whatever. I'm glad they brought him back. Bringing back I can't pronounce his last name. John Rhys Davis, I believe his name is. Bringing him back as Sala, it's always good to see him. Obviously near the end, Marion comes back. Always nice to see her. I'm glad she's back. The first 20 minutes of this movie, I would say, probably the best part of the movie for me. I mean, the first 20 minutes of this movie easily feels like a Steven Spielberg directed sequence. Like a Steven Spielberg type of finale. I mean, it feels like Indiana Jones. But once you get to the present day, well, present day being 1969, you start to see Spielberg's absence in the dip in quality a little bit. But I'll get into that in just a little bit. John Williams, his score slaps as always. I'm glad he's back in the composer's chair, and just as always, and namely all of his tracks, he does a fantastic job here. As always. I mean, I don't think that this man has ever done any wrong in any movie, and he really just gives it his all here. So, at least there's that. For the most part, that is where my praises end, because although the action is good, it's also kind of, because it's a very action-packed movie, this is a 2.5-hour movie, it still goes on for far longer than it needs to. I feel like this movie does not need to be 2.5 hours. They could have tightened it up to at least a 2-hour film. Where do I begin with these criticisms? Because there are quite a few of them. I'm just going to start with the biggest pet peeve of mine. Helena Shaw, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, I believe her name is. Couldn't stand her character. She was obnoxious. I'm just going to say she was like a Kathleen Kennedy stand-in. I mean, granted, it just wasn't as bad as I thought, but still, I mean, for most of the movie, she was bashing Indy. I mean, just kind of made a bunch of jokes that she thought were funny, basically saying that, oh, Indiana Jones is old, which I get it. He's old. But let's not make fun of him for it. I mean, he got roped into this because of you, and he's working much harder than you are. And you're making fun of him for being old. And yeah, that is her character for like 95% of the movie until, or 90% of the movie until the last 10%, they try to make her emotional, which, granted, her acting is good in those moments, but it doesn't quite add up. Or it doesn't quite make sense considering that her character, for the most part, throughout most of the runtime, just made fun of, Harrison Ford's character for being old, basically. And it's just, I'm not going to get too into it. I know that a lot of people have like the Rey Skywalker comparisons in there. I see it in this. I just choose not to talk about it too much because it's just not worth my time. I mean, it truly isn't. I mean, I can go on it for days, hours even, just how differently the character could be. I feel like instead of making fun of Indy, I wish they made her more of an ally towards Indy. Like they both recognized their strengths and weaknesses and they both helped each other. It seemed like Helena just helped Indy throughout most of the movie without Indy, figuring it out for himself or working through these problems. Granted, I get it, he's old, but still, in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, he was old, but at least he, worked through, like, throughout most of the movie series, I mean, it's very bare-knuckled. I mean, he barely gets out of there alive in most of these situations. And in this one, he gets saved by Helena for the most part, which is kind of a bummer. And the fact that she, ridicules him, and that's what he gets in return, it's kind of just not good stuff. Next to that, her partner, I call him dollar store short round because I get what they're doing. They're trying to set her up as like the next new Indiana Jones or the next new archaeologist adventurist from Lucasfilm that's going to continue on Indy's legacy. No, I'm not going to watch that. I'm pretty sure 90% of the world is not going to watch that. Considering that Lucasfilm is already kind of at this point just kind of burned itself to the ground, especially with this movie, this was the final nail in the coffin, so I don't think they should continue her character. But anyway, I get what they're doing with the character. And he is ultimately dollar store short round, just with none of the charm of him. This kid has no charm to him, like Short Round did in Temple of Doom. They even give him and Helena the same type of backstory with Indy and Short Round. Like, they give him the same type of backstory, but again, it's just another one of those things where you just wish you'd rather see Short Round instead. I'd say obviously the action is really cool. I know a lot of people are going to be talking about the ending, but the final act for me, look, I get it. Indiana Jones, in this series you got proof that God exists. You got God's wrath in the first movie, you got Satan's wrath in the second movie, you got God's miracle in the third movie, and then you got aliens in the fourth, and now in this one you have time travel. Or it's weird, it's not really time travel. They do go back in time, but it's not the time period that the villains want. They go back to, I think it's like 200 BC, around that point, during like the Roman Empire. age, and you just get, even for these movies, a very bonkers climax. I mean, and I saw this on IMAX too, so I was very hooked for the most part, which props to them for making this as entertaining as it is. But my jaw was on the floor for all the wrong reasons because I was dumbfounded throughout most of the climax, just how ridiculous. But it was a fun ridiculous. So at least it was entertainingly ridiculous. It didn't, ruin the film for me, but it did make me question what I was watching. And ultimately, I was just in awe. The fact that they went that direction by going back to that time period and staying there for a significant amount of time. And yeah. By the end of that sequence, that's where, again, it's another like Helena Shaw type of moment. I'm just going to spoil it for you. She punches Indy in the face to save him, to prevent him from staying in that time period, because he clearly wants to. Because throughout the movie, for many strange reasons, it happens so fast, Indy's framed for murder in New York, and that's why he goes on this adventure. That's another issue I have. It's not like he wants to go on this adventure. Throughout most of the movies, it seems like he wants to go on these adventures, or he's at least intrigued to. In this movie, he doesn't want to. He's pretty much roped in to do it. Because, A, he's framed for murder, he's wanted in New York, and B, Helena Shaw is a little brat who runs off, and technically, it's his goddaughter. And that's a cute concept. I just wish the movie handled it well. And the movie just doesn't handle it well at all. I mean, this movie's just... And that's the other thing with this movie. It's too long. 2.5 hours for an Indiana Jones movie. I mean, come on. I mean, you can clearly tell, A, it's 11 o'clock at night, so I'm doing this review because I want to get my thoughts in now versus wait until morning, where I barely remember what happened in the movie, and I'm just exhausted with this film in particular. But I guess, it's the final adventure, go big or go home. Sure, go for it. But I feel like they kind of went out with a whimper instead of a bang. Like they were hoping. But that's me personally. I mean, there's not much to talk about other than the first 20 minutes are pretty much just fantastic. And again, I'm very mixed about this because in a lot of ways this does things a lot better than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull did. But it's not much better than it. I almost want to say it's tied with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull for being the lower Indiana Jones movie. But again, the 20 minutes and the action that is there, and when Helena Shaw is not ruining the film, then it's not terrible. It's a pretty fun movie. And that's the best way I can explain this. Or the best way I can put it. It's a fun movie. It's by no means a terrible movie. I mean, I've seen much worse, clearly. And obviously, Crystal Skull, it's probably going to be the first one. Always and forever. So this movie will never take its place as being the worst Indiana Jones. But it's pretty close, I will say. It's pretty close up there. It's not much better, but it is just ever so slightly more enjoyable than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But yeah, that is the end of this series. And I will also say this is a much better finale to a series than what Star Wars did with Rise of Skywalker. So if that's at least a positive to go in, then there you go. But yeah, I mean, Disney, they they destroyed Star Wars. They destroyed Willow. And now I don't want to say they destroyed Indiana Jones because thankfully they haven't done a whole lot with that property and only did a fifth movie. But you can tell what they got their hands on. And in this movie, they got a lot of their fingerprints on this. Considering that it's a Paramount property and the Disney logo shows up, it almost kind of seems like weird. Like during the opening credits, when you see the Disney logo pop up first, I mean, what do I say? I know I went to go see this with my family, and my mom sure as heck was excited, but I actually wanted to boo the screen because Disney, I'm sorry to say, you may own Lucasfilm, but to me, Indiana Jones is a Paramount property and always will. And considering how much you ruined most of Lucasfilm properties, I mean, they canceled Willow. I mean, they even removed it on Disney Plus and Star Wars. It's just all going downhill at this point. So they just have nothing left. And this is the last thing that they could destroy. And thankfully, they didn't absolutely demolish the legacy, but they did taint it. And I think for me, that is the biggest sign to fire Kathleen and just drop Lucasfilm. But that's just my humble opinion. Take it easy, everyone. See ya.